panelists. I am a huge fan of each of you. I'll start with Tiffany. Tiffany Dufu is a catalyst at large in the world of women's leadership and the author of Drop the Ball, a memoir and manifesto that shows women how to cultivate the single skill they really need in order to thrive, the ability to let go. Named to Fast Company's League of Extraordinary Women, Tiffany is founder and CEO of The Crew, a peer coaching platform for women looking to accelerate their professional and personal growth. She was a launch team member to Lean In and was Chief Leadership Officer at Levo, one of the fastest growing millennial professional networks. And I know they have a thriving scene in Seattle too. Prior to that, Tiffany served as president of the White House Project, as a major gifts officer at Simmons College in Boston, and as associate director of development at Seattle Girls School. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rebekah Bastian is an entrepreneur, writer, artist, tech executive, mentor, wife, mother, and aerial acrobat. She is the CEO and co-founder of Own Trail and was previously vice president of product and vice president of community and culture at Zillow. Rebekah is the author of Blaze Your Own Trail, is a contributor to Forbes, and is a frequent speaker on social impact, career navigation, and corporate diversity. Welcome, Rebekah.
Yeah.
And then Mikaela Kiner. Mikaela has a master's in human resource management, is a certified executive coach and experienced consultant. In 2015, Mikaela founded Reverb, a leading provider of innovative HR services for startups and growing companies in the Pacific Northwest. An HR leader for nearly 20 years, Mikaela enjoys coaching leaders at all levels and helping companies build healthy, inclusive cultures. Thank you, Mikaela.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Yeah. I am thrilled that we've got you, each of you on the line here to share your experience and expertise and talk a little bit about your book and some of the things you have going on related to those books. I'm going to start with Tiffany, the first question. What was it like for you to put your experience down into words? How has that changed the way you've approached your work and life?
Sure. Thank you for having me. And it's really an honor to be on with Mikaela and with Rebekah. I mean, the most important thing I think for me to share is that my life's work is advancing women and girls. That's pretty much why I'm on the planet. And I mean that literally. Every job that I've ever had, every check I've ever written to a nonprofit, every board I've ever sat on has been completely focused on how do we harness the power and the ingenuity of women for the benefit of all of us, or girls for the benefit of all of us. And so Drop the Ball was just a manifestation of my passion and my purpose. I'm very driven to solve problems for women. So it wouldn't dawn on me to write a book unless I felt like there was a particular challenge or a particular problem that I was constantly bumping up against that I felt like could have been a solution. And Drop the Ball was really that for me. In 2012, 2013, when Lean In came out, I was doing a lot of public speaking. And I made an observation that even though I was doing a lot of keynotes on what I feel are the collective solutions to the women's leadership conundrum, equal pay for equal work, we need more affordable childcare, we need people like Mikaela who are helping companies to create cultures where everyone can bring their full selves, you know, to the table, and that's really critical work. I noticed that every time I stopped talking and we opened it up for the Q&A, the first set of questions that I would always get would be personal questions that to me had nothing to do with what I was talking about. Like, how do you manage it all? How do you do it all? So, you know, I eventually came to this Tiffany's epiphanies that women weren't asking me these questions because they actually cared about the details of my personal life. But that women were, asking that over and over because they were sitting in their work really was advancing women and girls. I'd have to be honest with them about the answer to that question. And so Drop the Ball was my response. It was just an answer to the question, how are you doing all of it? And it was an extremely difficult book for me to write. One, because I had to confess in the book as part of the experiment that I in some ways was a hypocrite, but even though publicly I lauded, the idea of diversity and inclusion, that when it came to my home, I was not very much a diversity and inclusion practitioner. In fact, everything in my home needed to be done a certain way, which was basically my way. And that even though I advocated for the importance of equality in the public sphere, in my private life, I was not the staunch feminist that I thought I was. In fact, I was pretty much on Stepford Wife autopilot. So it was a journey for sure. And the only thing that really motivated me was feeling like I went through a journey of figuring out how to drop the ball. And it took me about 3 years. If I could chronicle this for another woman and it not have to take her so long, and if I can be of service, then it'll be in alignment with why I'm on the planet. And I'll have to bring people in my life, certainly because the book is a memoir, along on that journey and get their permission and their consensus to share that part of the story.
That is so powerful, that the confession that led you to sharing your experience with everyone. And I know personally, when I read it, the concept of delegating was something I was very familiar with working in leadership development, but I also had that aha moment, thanks to your book, that I needed to bring that revolution home and start working on delegation in a different way as a feminist at home. So thank you for sharing that insight and experience. Mikaela and Rebekah, both of your books are unique in that they don't follow a usual format. And I'd love to know if you could each talk a little bit more about how you chose the format for your book. And I'll start with Rebekah.
So the format of my book it's an interactive book exploring the different decisions and pathways that women take through their personal and professional lives. And it follows the format of the childhood Choose Your Own Adventure series. So what that means is that at the end of each chapter, you make a decision and that tells you what chapter to go to next. So you, the reader, are the person who's experiencing the plot line in the book and making those decisions. To be honest, it came to me literally in the middle of the night. I woke up with the idea for this. I knew, I'd gotten into writing as a thing that I was enjoying only like 5 or 6 years ago. So it was a little bit of a later in my life discovery, and had been writing a lot of articles and had felt like it would be a fun thing to write a book, but didn't have a big idea and didn't want to pretend to be an expert on anything, And so this as a kind of exploratory format, when the idea came to me, really resonated because I'm a real believer in there being no one right path. And that's something that I've shared with a lot of young women that I've talked with, or not so young women. I think we oftentimes have this idea in our minds that we're supposed to know where we're going and how we're going to get there, and that there's some right way to be doing it. And so I'm always trying to share that idea that there is no one right way, and stay open to possibilities. And we oftentimes can't predict what the outcome of decisions is going to be anyway. And so the format of this book I got excited about because it's almost a way of experiencing that lesson yourself instead of just having somebody tell you that. And so it came to me and I just started running with it.
Yeah, and you interviewed many women to contribute to that book. Is that right?
No, not really. I used a lot of, I've had years and years, or, possibly a lifetime of talking with women about their experiences and about the decisions they're struggling with, and the things that, I think through friendships and through leadership roles and mentorship roles, I've been lucky to hear about some of the struggles that don't get talked about as openly sometimes. And so a lot of those stories and my own experiences and, all kind of were compiled into this, but I didn't set out to do a series of interviews as I was writing it.
Well, the anecdotes, the stories that it's built on definitely felt familiar. And I'm sure to a lot of readers, it feels familiar. And how important to reinforce the idea that there's not one continuous path in your career, and how important it is to choose a different path. And your book is so fun in saying, like, you know what, I'm going to do this now and then go back and rewind and try something else later. And I also loved how every choice ended up with a positive consequence as well. And I am pretty sure that was intentional, but that was a great addition to the book.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's spanning not just career journeys, but it's our personal and our professional lives, because I think, particularly for women, those are so intertwined, and trying to separate it out, like Tiffany was saying, she might be giving a talk about business concepts and people are asking her about how she manages her personal life. And it's because they're just so deeply integrated. And yeah, there's 19 different endings, and each one of them is titled Happily Ever After. And, happily ever after this or that. None of them are like, fairy tale endings. None of them are perfect. And, in every different ending, the reader has had to go through a lot of really unexpected and sometimes really difficult things. But the idea is that, like, at the end of all of it, we can be okay. Like, we can find our happiness and we can make it through because we're strong enough to do that. And it might not be the happy ending we hoped for, but we're okay.
Yeah. And Mikaela, the format of your book is so helpful, almost like a guide and a how-to, as well as capturing the experiences of these female firebrands. Can you tell us more about how you chose the format of your book?
Absolutely. And I do want to say, though, I remember so well reading Rebekah's book. I read it the last time I was on a plane, so right before COVID. And it was perfect because I wanted to read every ending, right? You want to go back and be like, well, what if I did dump that guy that didn't support me? Like, what would have happened? So it was great. I love that. Choose your own adventure. Yeah, so the format of my book was that I identified and then interviewed 13 amazing, mission-driven professional women who are the female firebrands. And I asked each of them the same set of questions. So I chose these 11 questions in advance. So I thought, topics that may resonate with them. And then it was really interesting to take all of their responses and see what did and what didn't. And so really it was the questions that resonated with them that ended up forming the 4 chapters of the book. And I got the idea, there were 2 different things that had happened leading up to that really gave me the idea of the format that I wanted to use and the interview approach. One, which I talk about in the book, was that I was one of several women who were giving lightning talks at a Seattle Tech event, Ladies in Seattle Tech. And it was on, something about career advice. We each gave our talk, all of us very different backgrounds, different personalities, different industries. What was really interesting was that when we were done, I just watched all the women from the audience and how they gravitated to talk to whoever's story had resonated with their own. And so they gave me that kind of aha moment. I was like, oh, there's so much power in women's stories. The other thing that was around the same time is, and I'm not a huge Tim Ferriss follower, but Tim Ferriss had come out with his podcast and book, Tribe of Mentors. And I happened to listen to I kind of binged on the first several podcast episodes. And the concept and format of his book was that he talked to people or interviewed people who were the best in the world at whatever they did. And that could range from like business to sports to CrossFit. It could have been anything. And he asked them this standard set of questions, but they were unique questions, right? They weren't the typical interview questions. And so with his questions, he drew out these very interesting responses and insights. So for me, it was a blend of those. And then just as you mentioned, Adrienne, it had to be practical. Like, I think I'm just a very practical person. That's how my brain works. And I wanted to write the book for individuals because, companies, definitely leadership and HR and DEI leaders need, ideas and support as well. But my intention was more like, if I'm the woman in the room and someone makes an inappropriate comment or someone interrupts me, I don't want to have to rely on my organization to have figured this out or take the right steps. I want to really give women tools and help empower them in the moment to say, how can I be prepared for this? And how can I respond? Or how can I respond on behalf of my colleague if I see this happening to her?
Mm-hmm. And it's also very welcoming to male advocates, right?
Yeah, I mean, men are such a big part of the equation. And first of all, I have had more, probably just, more men than women in my own professional career who have been those great managers, mentors, advocates, and champions, because I have worked for more men than women, right? And I have had so many positive experiences with men in leadership. So I really wanted to highlight that and show what that opportunity is for men who are great advocates. The other thing I was hearing from men was men who are well-intended, but would tell me, I don't know whether or how to be part of this conversation about women in the workplace. And of course, I'm thinking, well, you absolutely need to be part of the conversation. And so I wanted to give them some tips and tools, as you said, to welcome them, but also help them enter the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great. And coming off of that, everyone here is writing about a female experience for women. In addition to, I love how, Rebekah, you said this at the beginning of your book, it's also an opportunity to dive and immerse yourself in the female experience. And Tiffany, also your book is promoted not just for women, but people who live with those high achieving women. And even with all that in mind, I'd love to know from each of you what intersectionality means to you in the context of the books that you've written, and how you're reinforcing, all types of diversity in the work you're doing. Who would like to go first with that?
I'm happy to go.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so intersectionality as it relates to Blaze Your Own Trail has been a really important question for me, because the book is told from the vantage point of a single person, that it can't include all identities. And so I addressed that by, and I as my first book, kind of defaulted to identities that I hold myself as, certainly pulling from experiences. And so in the beginning, in the foreword or the prologue, I name the identities and the privileges that this character holds, and acknowledge the fact that many of these experiences could play out differently depending on, on what different identities a woman might hold. And then one thing I do throughout the book is weave data into the plot line in order to create a sense of solidarity around a lot of the experiences that are fairly common but don't get talked about so much, that might be more taboo, or that women don't feel as comfortable sharing openly. So as I wove that data in, I tried to pull in data that looked at what percentage of women might have made the same decision or might have experienced this same event or encounter, and what that might look like for a Black woman, or a lesbian woman, or physically a woman that has physical disabilities, or so in different parts of it I can pull in those data points. I will say, as a teaser to possibly a future question, that there's a lot of data missing about women's lives, particularly when you look at it from an intersectional standpoint. And so, as we talk about the company that I built, Own Trail, that really took off from the idea of this book, one of the big things we're really excited about there is getting deeper data and making that more available in order to tell a full story about what women of the different intersections of women's identities, what those experiences look like.
Yeah, great.
Sure, I'm happy to go next, and I love this question, as you know. So it was very obvious to me when I was creating this original list of women, these firebrands, that that should be a diverse list of people, right? So looking at background, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc. I think what was much less obvious to me was just how much richer that would make the book. I mean, it was done for that reason, but nonetheless, as I was interviewing women, they shared so many stories that surprised me. And it was interesting because as I would get surprised, I was thinking, you know, and I've been in HR for 20 plus years, right? I would just think if I'm surprised, like if this, you know, feels like new information to me, it's certainly going to feel like new information to a lot of other folks out there and a lot of readers. So, yeah, I think it was fascinating, and I learned so many things that I didn't expect. I also wrote, you know, there were only really these 4 key chapters to the book, and some I absolutely would have anticipated, like there was a Me Too chapter because every woman had had one or more Me Too experiences. What I did not anticipate was that I would be writing an entire chapter about privilege, and that was both male privilege as well as white privilege. And I probably should have realized that going in. I think that was naive now, but I had no idea. And I felt all of this discomfort when I was writing that chapter. And I realized it was because I was needing to reflect and write about so many experiences that were not my own. And I was fortunate to bring in a wonderful collaborator, Aiko Bethia, who at the time was the head of diversity at Fred Hutch and is, you know, now on her own as an executive coach. And I learned from that as well that like I just couldn't personally write on this topic without the support of a woman of color, and she was gracious enough to join me in that.
That's awesome. Thank you both for going first. I'm trying not to be the person, be the Black person who goes first. I always try to hold back. You know, I'm an old school feminist, meaning that when I'm talking about women, I'm talking about all women. I'm talking about our sisters in our LGBTQ community. I'm talking about women of color. I'm talking about women with disabilities, women from different socioeconomic backgrounds. I believe it means all of us. And, you know, we're half of the population. So from my perspective, it's very difficult to be talking about women without talking about immigrants, without talking about pretty much every sector of society. That being said, Drop the Ball was an experiment for me in just being honest and true about a few things. One is that the book is a memoir about being very overwhelmed and taking on a lot. And I wanted to make sure that the book, just like with my parenting, was modeling the philosophy. So I was very intentional in Drop the Ball around not trying to speak to all people and ensuring that the book was not trying to be all things to all people, because I know what that feels like, and you'll burn out trying to do that. And so I was intentional about that. I was also really intentional about the fact that I believe, you know, you don't have a right to tell someone else's story. And maybe I just perceive that I'm not a good enough writer to be able to embody someone else and tell their story. So, you know, I did some interviews and I included some examples of women who reflect different aspects of diversity than certainly I do. But I tried to be very careful not to impose my lens on that and to really do it when I felt like it was appropriate and when it really made sense. And then third, I tried to offer frameworks that were genderless. You know, the idea of getting clear about what matters most to you, the idea of figuring out what your highest and best use is and achieving what matters most to you, and figuring out how to engage other people in your life to help you live, you know, and create a life that you're passionate about. I think everyone's entitled to that. I think that's a framework that anyone can use. Certainly my ministry is women. And so, you know, I was speaking to them, but certainly, you know, as I talk about the book and I talk about the frameworks, you know, like Mikaela said, I have many men, you know, who come up to me and say, can you sign my book? I'm the one who needs to drop the ball. And I'm like, I'm with you, brother. You know, I'm completely with you.
And, you know, somebody mentioned it before, I think it was you, Mikaela, that the power of stories and the stories that you're all telling, it's amazing that you are extending beyond just the storytelling in your book to creating a community outside of that. And I've had the chance to apply for the crew, Tiffany, and Rebekah, I'm in the process of building my own trail. I would love for you two to talk a little bit about how you are extending your audience into this part of a community outside of that. Tiffany, do you want to talk about the crew?
Sure, absolutely. You know, the crew was just another iteration of me solving problems for women. I am fortunate to be the cumulative investment of a lot of people, meaning that I've been mentored, I've been sponsored, I've been well raised. You know, I just have had people pouring themselves into me. And I more specifically have a crew. I have a group of 9 other women who hold me accountable to my ambition, who help me create plans. And it's been an incredible part of my journey. And I think that peer mentorship is really important. The challenge is that as I began to evangelize this idea of the crew, which really just started as pep talks, you know, at the end of my conversations with women, I realized that I wasn't sensitive to a pain point, which is that there's a lot of work involved in finding your crew. And it was in January of 2018 when I was talking to a woman and I was telling her about how you need to find your crew. And she said to me, Tiffany, I don't think you appreciate what that takes. And then she walked me through the actual workflow. So she started with, let's just say I could get access to the cocktail party or the conference or the event. Think about it now in the midst of, you know, a viral pandemic, how you get access to people. She's like, then I would have to awkwardly introduce myself to a bunch of strangers. Let's just say we were in pre-COVID and I'd have to collect a bunch of business cards. Then I have to schedule like the coffees or the teas or the lunches or the Zoom meetings, whatever you want to call them, to talk to all of these people, find out if we're compatible. I mean, she walked through the whole thing down to, and then you want me to organize like regular gatherings where we put forth our goals together. Like I'm exhausted just thinking about what would be required. And it was a huge Tiffany's epiphany for me. That's what I call my aha moments, where I realized, oh my gosh, if your life's work is advancing women and girls, you should probably stop preaching to them about how they need to go find a crew, and you should just find the crew. Like, why don't you do it, since you're the one who knows all of these amazing women? So that's really what the crew is trying to do, to take the work out of networking, to help women and support them in achieving their goals. You just apply like you did, Adrian, and we match you with 9 other women. And you really focus during your crew journey on realizing very specific intentions or goals that you rally around each other for. So, you know, for me, it was, wow, where is the pain point? How can I solve it? How can I apply my experience in building inclusive communities for women to just the next chapter of me living out my epitaph?
That's awesome. Rebekah, tell us about Own Trail.
Yeah, it's a story of accidental entrepreneurship where, you know, I was at Zillow for 15 years and loving it. And I wrote my book and had signed a publishing deal and was waiting for it to come out, and started playing around with what I thought would be a book launch website. And next thing you know, it's taken on a life of its own. And, you know, I've started really identifying some problems that I felt needed solving and having some big ideas around it. And I ended up forming this really incredible team, and we all ended up leaving our jobs to do this. So it really came out of the book, but then went its own direction. The problems we're looking to solve really are the fact that I think a lot of women worry about their paths in life and worry about where they're going. And we look around and we see kind of all these picture perfect end results, but there's not a really easy way to see what the authentic journey looks like to get there. And we need to see people who look like us in the places that we aspire to. And we don't always have that in our immediate purview. And when we don't, it means we can lack confidence to go after things in life, but we can also lack the imagination of what we could be going after. And then like all of that, but then on the flip side is the fact that we want to be able to give back to those coming up behind us, and yet cannot say yes to every single coffee chat request, or, you know, everyone that wants to hear what our story has been, and is looking for that guidance. And so the kind of theory with Own Trail is that both of those sides of the equation have traditionally been shorthanded as women saying, I need a mentor, or I want to be a mentor. And traditional mentorship, the one-on-one model, can be really powerful, but it's honestly leaving a lot of women behind. 75% of women say they aren't giving or getting the mentorship they need. And so kind of in a similar model to my book, where it's trying to explore all these different decisions and pathways, what we're doing with Own Trail is creating a space for women to share the trails that they've blazed through life as a series of interconnected milestones. And we're collecting all of those stories into an aggregate platform that will really provide the guidance and inspiration that women are looking for when they're looking for mentorship, and also provide a really actionable way to give back through these micro acts of mentorship. And so we launched that in February. We're still in beta, but we've been seeing some really incredible trails being shared, and it's been just incredibly inspiring to see what's happening so far. And I would love all the women who are listening to share their trails on Own Trail, and for men to ask those women that inspire you to do so, because it's really, it's the culmination of all these experiences that can really help propel women forward, I believe.
Rebekah, put the URL in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
Did you put yours in too, Tiffany?
I did, but it's thecrew.com.
Great. And I love how both of you and what you're doing are so enormously helpful from a personal and professional development angle. The Own Trail path building is a huge opportunity for reflection. What has led me to where I am today? What can I learn about myself and my values? And what are the things that I really want to hold on to from this experience? And what might I be ready to depart from and let go of, as we all sit on this potential turning point in our lives too. And Tiffany, the group peer coaching, accountability and inspiration and network that comes with a program like The Crew, this is another really powerful developmental experience outside of just, reading a book. So I love what you two have done with those. And Mikaela, you continue to amplify voices in all manner of ways. You have a podcast. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, the podcast has been really fun. I brainstormed with my team, before the book came out, what are some ways that we might want to extend the work and include people in this work? And we thought of, should we do workshops? Should we do skill building? And we landed on, I had always wanted to do a podcast. I think just like I'd always wanted to write a book, I was sort of waiting for the moment and decided, that was the moment. And I always had the vision that, yes, there are 13 amazing women featured in the book, but of course, just like Own Trail, right, the opportunity is endless to find and feature more women. And doing the podcast has been a really fun way to do that. So I've just gotten to meet and speak to so many amazing women through the podcast. Tiffany was my last interview for season 2, yes, and not out yet, but coming soon. And we've already started lining up some guests for season 3, so it's been really fun. And then the other thing that we've had a great time doing just on social media is Firebrand Friday, where each Friday we just choose to feature a different woman who's doing amazing work, whether professional or in her community. And I think the responses have been so much fun, right? We don't feature prominent women, right? You're not going to see Michelle Obama or Melinda Gates or Brene Brown, right? They've gotten their due attention, but we're featuring really these kind of local unsung heroes. And what's so much fun about that is, I think, the kudos and support that they get. And we see these amazing comments, like one of the women we featured said, "Is it super nerdy that the first thing I wanted to do was go and tell my mom, that I got featured here?" And we're like, no, that's great. Like, what a great reaction. And so it's just been really a fun platform to celebrate and highlight amazing women.
That's great. And we have a question in the Q&A, and I would love to invite other participants today to add your questions to the Q&A. This question is from Sonali, and it's for all of the panelists. And I'm sure that you each at some level have experience with this. When drawing on your personal experiences in order to write your book, how did you deal with the family and friends that probably factored into what you were writing, who may be private people. Tiffany, I want to start with you because I'd love to hear what your husband thought of this process as well. So you want to go first?
Sure, of course. Drop the Ball is a number of things. One of the things it is a bit of a romantic comedy about how I got my husband off the couch. Of course, the ending, not to spoil the ending, but he never was really on the couch, is kind of the point of the book. But I believe that happiness is very much correlated with the strength of the relationships you have with the people that you love the most. So I was not about to be an author that was going to write anything or publish anything that certainly my husband in this case, because he's another character in the book and a pretty big part of it, didn't feel comfortable with. I wrote the entire manuscript and then I gave it to him and gave him a deadline for reading the manuscript, for reviewing it before it went to my editor, so that my editor wouldn't be in the position of trying to negotiate between me and my husband. And she got what he felt comfortable with. And there were aspects of the book, of the manuscript, he said, no way, Jose, that's coming out, that's coming out. And I just dealt with it. Most everyone else in the book, either I changed their name or identifying aspects of their lives so that people would know who they were. And then I did also send the manuscript to my sister, Trinity, to my father, to one of my best girlfriends who was featured in the book, just so that they could, understand the context in which they were being spoken about. And I just got permission from them before we published it.
Yeah. Rebekah, how about you?
Well, it's funny because I have a lot of personal details in my book of my life and my close friends' lives and women's lives that have confided in me, and no one will ever know which pieces belong to who, because it's, kind of pulled together into a fictional narrative. And I've been asked before, like, so was this your experience or who? And I'm like, not telling. It's a smorgasbord of different life experiences all mixed into a story. So I didn't have to worry about the protecting identities too much because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mikaela?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a great question. A twofold, right? So I have the women I interviewed who obviously got a chance to pre-read and sign off on everything that I said and where I quoted them. And, there were some who said, oh, maybe I made a comment or shared something during the interview and I'd really rather not have that made public. The other thing I was really intentional about on the whole was every time there was a positive story, right, about a mentor, a great boss, an ally, an advocate, we did our best to name them, but we didn't name individuals or companies, right, where there were negative stories, just because it's not the point, right? The point was the story and the concept. And some people, I think maybe if those people had great self-awareness, they might recognize themselves in those stories. My guess is that they don't or haven't. But there was only one story that I think I can say it was my story, but there was one story I felt strongly enough, like I made a lot of changes so it wouldn't be identifiable, sort of changing roles, changing names, because it was just sort of, the behaviors were too egregious and didn't want that to be recognized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also want to know from each of you, in our final time here, what is something that you would really like to share with our audience today? Something that you learned in the process of writing your book, publishing your book, you've learned after. What is one parting thought that you'd like to share? And I'll let anyone go first that feels the spirit move them.
Yes, the spirit is moving me. One of the things that my parents taught me is that if you want something you've never had before, you're going to have to do something you've never done before in order to get it. And that certainly was true for me in writing Drop the Ball. It's true for me as an entrepreneur. I take inspiration from Rebekah and Mikaela in doing that, but I just feel like we a lot of times are waiting for something else to happen. We're waiting for the right salary. We're waiting for the right publisher. We're waiting for the right dress size or the right, in order to be able to kind of move and take that step. And I think the point, and certainly something that really resonated with me about Mikaela and Rebekah's books, is the importance of just doing it, and even if you're terrified, just do it. That's what courage is. It's doing it even though you're afraid, and taking the risk.
So true.
Yeah, I would say that something that I've learned through the process of writing a book and starting a company is that, two things can be true at the same time. The thing you're doing can be really meaningful and worth doing and can positively impact people's lives. And there will be people who don't get that. And, specifically, like, I went through a lot of rejection of like reaching out cold to literary agents before I found a phenomenal publisher through a series of connections, and ended up signing directly with them. And, had I let all those rejections hold me back, I wouldn't have had the experience of having the book ultimately published. I've been fundraising, which is a huge exercise in the duality of like, business is going really well, we're making a really good impact, this is incredible, and I'm being rejected constantly, And I think being able to embrace both of those truths at the same time without losing your mind is a really, good thing to learn. And, and will keep you moving forward. That just because this person rejected me, it doesn't mean that this thing I'm doing isn't really meaningful and important, And so that's been a big lesson that I continue to learn.
Yeah, that is so huge for sure. For me, I think it's back to the importance of women sharing their stories, but also just that we do talk about our challenges with somebody, right? Whether it's colleagues, coworkers, friends, spouse, coach, therapist. I think it matters less who we're talking with than that we're talking and sharing. And I really, admire Tiffany's vulnerability and sharing this romantic comedy / memoir. I think there is so much vulnerability in there. And I think especially, one of my chapters ended up being about female rivalry, which was not something I anticipated and was actually really not something that I asked about, but I heard all of these really visceral and painful stories about rivalry, and ended up meeting a couple of women after the book came out who had experiences with that. In one case, 19 years ago. And because of the shame, and because she didn't really have a name for that, she didn't know it was something that happened, she had internalized it. And she said for 19 years, she had only spoken to maybe one other person about this. She blamed herself, and she said, don't take this the wrong way, but I was really glad to see that this is something that happens, right? Because then it made it more about, systems and et cetera, and less about her personally. And I really felt her pain, thinking she had held this in for so long, right? And knowing that if we talk about these things, then they get easier, and it enables us to move on as well.
Yeah. I want to just say, like, this has been a real joy for me to be hearing from each of you, the insights that you have to offer as entrepreneurs, as authors, as high achieving women, and the stories that you've shared through your books and tonight have been so inspiring to so many. And I highly recommend each of them to be part of your library, gifts for new grads, everything in between. And I love all the experiences that you've set up for us to take part in after reading the book. That brings us together in a community. So I can see we're getting some thanks coming through in the chat, and I'll turn it back to Colleen.
Yeah, I just want to repeat all of Adrian's sentiments of thanking the three of you of being here tonight, but also thanking everyone that has listened in or is listening in now at a later time. Because as we think more about this and connect with other women and realize that our experiences are, while individual, also collective and shared, it empowers us to make changes in a lot of those challenges. And so thank you for sharing your stories to help us share our own and write our own. And I was checking because it looked like there was a Q&A, but it was saying thank you to all of you, and you're all fabulous. So that's it. But I think this is a perfect time to finish us all out. And I guess I'll just say thank you again. Thank you, Mikaela, Rebekah, Tiffany, and Adrian, for your time.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.